This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Monday Twilight Show with me, Adam Colbeck. Tonight, we are going to be digging into all things professional development. We've done instructional coaching before, and now we're going to broaden that lens back out again and look at the wider world of PD with my guest, Danny Sands. So sit back, tune in, and talk it out.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight on Teachers Talk Radio for the Monday Twilight Show. Tonight, I've got a guest on who is someone who works in my own school, so it's quite exciting to hear from them and to hear a little bit about what they think goes on in my school, because I think it's pretty great, but it's always quite interesting to hear what other people think. Tonight's show is also coming to you from my parents' front room, which is about as glamorous as it gets, and exactly what I was envisaging when I went into the glamorous world of podcast producing. So that's where I am, but I've just come off the back of a weekend of moving house and about 3 hours sleep in total. So hopefully tonight's show won't be a reflection of that. So yeah, we are going to get into all things professional development tonight. And the reason for that is because professional development is surely the single biggest thing that school leaders can do to improve schools. Teaching is the core business of schools, and if we can make sure that we get better teaching, we're going to get better learning, we're going to get better outcomes as a result, and better life chances, and all the positive things that run alongside that. But all too often, professional development fails to land how we as leaders want it to land, and we're going to try and unpick a little bit about why that's the case so often tonight. And we're going to talk a bit about what we can potentially do about it. One paper that we're going to continually mention, or I'm certainly going to try and mention a lot tonight, and I mention it all the time, and my guest Danny's probably sick of hearing me talk about it, is Sam Sims' 2021 paper, where he talked about 14 mechanisms of effective professional development. And the reason that paper was such an influential one was because that prior to that, really, there'd been lots of research conducted that seemed to find sort of correlations between some of the most successful professional development programs out there, but they quite often focused on forms and the characteristics of the professional development took. So things like collaboration, or the amount of inquiry orientated learning that was going on throughout those professional development sequences, or perhaps how coherent the change that the professional development was trying to bring about was with the existing school curricula and policies. But what Sims et al., it's important to say as well, what Sims and the rest of his research team argued was that view was quite flawed, because it was built on correlational links between the most successful programs, but they didn't really get to the active ingredients of what actually made those things successful. And for anybody that kind of hears that term active ingredients used quite a lot and wants to know a little bit more about what that actually means when we use that term, I'm going to give an example that I heard some time ago, and I can't for the life of me remember where I heard it from. It may have been Nick Pointer. And Nick always has lots of really useful and thoughtful things to say about PD, so it sounds like something that might have come from him. But whoever it was described active ingredients within the context of a tube of toothpaste. So when you look at a tube of toothpaste, you've got the packaging, and you've got like the screw-on lid, and like the material that the actual tube is made out of, and all of those things are surface level features of that toothpaste, but they're not the active ingredient. The active ingredient is the thing that makes the toothpaste do its job, which is to clean your teeth. So the ingredient that makes the toothpaste do its job is fluoride. So the fluoride is the active ingredient because that's what makes the toothpaste successful at doing its job. And what Sims and his team tried to get at was, what are the active ingredients of professional development? What are the active ingredients that make professional development hit the spot and actually have the impact that we aim for it to have, and create a change for teachers in terms of their learning and understanding? And what they found within their paper was that there were 14 mechanisms that provided the greatest leverage for leaders of PD to make sure that the PD landed as intended. Now, what's really interesting about this, and this is what hopefully we're going to get into as part of our conversation tonight is that Danny has very recently planned, designed and delivered a sequence of PD with the 14 mechanisms that Sims and his team came up with in their paper in mind, and has deliberately planned in the mechanisms to the sessions that she has run. So we're going to hear a little bit about how she's done that, and what the impact of that has been, and it's all still in its initial stages, but we can get a pretty good steer on what we think the impact is going to be in the long term, and also just how it kind of feels to have delivered PD in that way, and perhaps also what people have said about how it felt to receive PD in that way, and how different it may have been. We're also going to talk about the importance of sequences of PD. So we talk a lot in teaching about the importance of sequencing lessons, and adults learn in the same way that everybody else does. It's all about sequencing learning together so that it's clear and coherent, and the way that one thing builds on top of what's already gone. And the way that we do that is by designing sequences of professional development rather than kind of the traditional standalone PD sessions that we would have had maybe, or I certainly had earlier on in my career as well. And I'm not sure that they ever really had a great deal of impact, but probably more importantly than that, I'm not sure that anybody really ever realized that they were supposed to have, like consciously realized that they were supposed to have an impact on the quality of your teaching. I think a lot of the time it was just sort of seen as a role that you had to fulfill as part of your job, was rocking up to your weekly staff meeting and listening to whoever it was that was put at the front of the room that week. I'm not sure it was ever really like a conscious thing of, right, this is something that's there to make me better at teaching, and if I can do what's being talked about, then I'm going to end up doing my job better. But what is definitely true is that if you deliver really high quality sequences of PD, it's much more clear to people exactly what it is that you're aiming for, and exactly how that's going to help them get better at their job, and everything, that all of the joys that come with that. So things like meaning and purpose that we talked about in previous shows when I had Paul Klein on and we were talking about instructional coaching. All of that will come through as well if people can really connect to the aims of your PD, which is far easier to do if you are delivering in sequences. So what we're ultimately aiming for with any PD that we design, before I bring in Danny, what the message I really want to leave you with is that we're trying to design PD in a way that changes people's beliefs about teaching. So we hear a lot this term buy-in. And actually, I think it can be a really unhelpful term. I think it sounds quite transactional for obvious reasons, and I think we can aim for better than that in teaching. And certainly, if we want long-term sustainable change, and if we want to really make sure that kids are getting the very best deal, and that teachers are getting sustainably better in a way that is self-sustaining as well, a way that inspires people to continue to want to get better, we have to change beliefs. We have to get people to believe different things about how teaching and learning work, and therefore be able to motivate them to go and take forth those beliefs and find other ways to apply them into different aspects of their work. Getting buy-in is to me anyway, and it sounds like you're just getting people to do the thing that you want them to do, to be willing to do it. And I think getting people to believe in something rather than getting them just to be willing to do it, I think that's a step up, and is certainly what we should be aiming for if we are leaders of PD. So hopefully we're going to hear how Danny has gone about doing that in our school. So without any further ado, I will bring Danny into the conversation. Danny, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Again, it's like it doesn't matter how many of these shows I do, like the heart in the mouth moment when I say, can you hear me? And then you get that pause while whoever it is unmutes. It never leaves you. So yeah, Danny, thanks for joining us. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I feel all right. Just got back from a busy day at school.
Nice. Is this the first podcast you've done?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Welcome to the wonderful world of podcasting. I do know that you were a bit of a sensation during COVID, weren't you? On like Teacher TikTok?
Oh dear. Yeah.
So you had lots of how many views or likes? I'm not very up to speed with those kinds of things.
I had 3 viral videos and 45,000 followers.
Wow. 3. Yeah. Like, what qualifies a video as viral?
It's just a video that gets more than 1 million views.
More than 1 million views?
Yeah, one of them had 4.5 million.
4.5 million people watching it. How long was the video?
It wasn't even a video, like it wasn't even a great video. It was just we had an NBA player visit our school once, and he put a basketball that was already spinning on my finger. And yeah, the video got so popular, but it wasn't even because of what the actual video was. It was more everyone was questioning if he was my dad because I looked so short compared to him. Yeah, yeah. But I decided after lockdown and after deciding to start a family that I didn't really have the time for that anymore.
No, fame's busy, I guess, isn't it?
It is,
well,
yeah.
4.5 million views on TikTok. We've currently got about 4.5 live listeners tonight. So welcome to those people. But okay, do you want to just start off then by just telling us a little bit about you and like what's your story? So aside from TikTok, like where did you start? What's your journey been like, and where are you at now?
Yeah, so I started teaching when I was 21. And I was an NQT at my current school actually. And my school changed quite a lot throughout the years. We had so many different SLT teams, and we had a whole new build and reconstruction redone. So the whole school community has changed in the time that I've been there. And in my second year of teaching, I became head of Key Stage 2 and head of maths. And then I did that for a few years and then went on maternity to have my daughter, and then came back as a year group leader and head of maths. So yeah, a bit up and down. I've had experience in every year group. So I've taught every year group except for year one. They're my only year group that I haven't taught yet.
Next year.
Yeah. So yeah, I've had kind of, I would say it was a really good experience of the different year groups because I went up. So I went from reception to 2 to 3 to 6 to 5 to 6 to 4 and that way. And that was really useful because I got to see starting points for children, but also what their next starting point was going to be. So it was really good knowledge to gain, really, to understand, what a child ending reception needs to achieve by the end of their next year, just to kind of get a good viewpoint of how much progress they have to make in that year.
Yeah, I think it's on the subject of PD as well. I think it's probably the best professional development, or some of the best professional development that you can get is making sure you've taught the entire, from a primary perspective anyway, you've taught the entire age range. It was definitely something in my head that before I went into senior leadership, I wanted to be able to say that I'd taught every year group and led every subject as well. Just because in primary, I think like the unique challenge of it is that you've got to teach every subject to every year group. And yeah, just sort of being prepared to do that by teaching every year group at some point. I think it's really good development. Was that something that was important to you when you were starting out?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to experience all the year groups. I was probably the same as every teacher who goes into primary who says, "Oh, I'll never go in year 6." And then it happened very quickly for me. And actually, I really enjoyed year 6. But then equally, I really enjoy reception. So yeah, I think each year group has different really good things and things that are kind of more challenging, but all in their own way.
And what about the maths thing? So, I mean, just, in terms of framing the rest of our conversation, we're going to talk about this PD that you've recently led within maths and the process that you've gone through with that. But as you're the maths lead, but were you like always passionate about maths, or was maths something that kind of came to you, as it were?
Yeah, it kind of all happened. So the position for math leader actually came up around the time that Mastery was first being introduced. And I really liked the concept of Mastery. Loved the idea that learning was practical, pictorial, and children were all working at a similar pace, a similar starting point. And where I had background in reception and Key Stage 1, it was very similar style to the way that you teach maths an early number. So I just kind of had a really good idea of it, did some research around mastery before I went for the interview. And I think I just kind of blew them away with my knowledge of mastery, and they were just kind of like thinking that the school was at the point where, do you remember when mastery first came in? You could do it voluntary before
Yeah.
it became a proper change. And they were at the point of voluntary. So they didn't have anyone else in the school who knew mastery. And yeah, I just slotted into that position really. And the first year was quite challenging because I was moving up in a school where I was quite a new member of staff. And it was kind of like you were saying earlier, that buy-in of, listen to me, please. I know I'm young, I know I'm new, but I do kind of know something. But actually, after a year of our data, because we were part of the Maths Hub Mastery TRG at the time,
Yeah.
and my school, myself and my head teacher were actually chosen to present at conference because our impact was so strong in mastery. So we presented our data, and once we'd had that success, the staff all started to buy in. And yeah, after that, I found that actually my role suited me really well, and the staff would come to me for advice in that area.
Nice. So it gave you almost that kind of credibility, but also they're kind of taking their staff's belief along with you as well. So that's great. When we come back, we're gonna go and hear a few words from our friends and sponsors, and then we're gonna get into the crux of what Danny's been doing recently in school, and hopefully we can see how that sort of passion for maths, but also that passion for impact has played out recently in the changes that she's led. But for now, we're going to just dip into a few messages.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading! Introducing My New Term, the revolutionary technology application connecting schools and candidates directly. Whether you're a school seeking to streamline your recruitment process or a candidate searching for your next role in education, My New Term has the solution. Developed by a former teacher, the technology at My New Term now connects tens of thousands of candidates with schools every month by digitizing the recruitment process. As a candidate, you can search for jobs, set up recommended jobs, and save time by applying directly to schools via a standardized online process. No more completing manual and repetitive application forms. Employers can streamline processes and save time utilizing the leading applicant tracking system for schools and multi-academy trusts. Recruitment in education has been broken for too long. My New Term is on a mission to change just that. Visit mynewterm.com to learn more, search all the latest opportunities, or schedule a demo. My New Term, shaping the future of education recruitment.
This is Teachers Talk Radio.
Right, welcome back. I'm sorry, the news just snuck up on me there. I wasn't expecting it, but the news is for later, so we'll park that to one side and come back to it in a little while. Right, so for the next part of our conversation, then, what I wanted to do, Danny, if it's all right with you, is kind of split it up into three parts. So we've got the first part around what you did before you actually started this PD sequence, then like the design work that went into it and the thinking that you did around how you were going to design each session and how they fitted together, and really pulling on a mechanisms-led approach. And then lastly, thinking about actually delivering that PD and what you found as you were going through it. And then we'll talk a little bit after that around sort of what next and all the sort of exciting strategic plans that you've got in the mix. But does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. Okay, so what did you do when you first had the idea of how you wanted to change maths in the school? So firstly, actually, where did that idea come from, and then what did you do?
Yeah, so the idea was a mixture of things. We were part of the Maths Hub Sustaining Mastery, Teaching for Mastery this year. And we myself and another member of staff had visited quite a few different schools in that process, and every school that we had visited, their mastery, their books, and the amount of work that the children were doing was a lot less than what our current school were doing. And we kind of questioned it because our data's quite high, and we didn't know if it was a good idea to change or not, because what we found is that there were many opportunities in lessons where, as a teacher, you would want to kind of really go and sit and work with a group or individual children, and you just didn't have the time for that because we were quite conscious about we had XYZ amount of questions that we wanted the children to get through. So we would then kind of sacrifice that time to sit with the children and really unpick their misconceptions. So it was that kind of idea of, well, hang on, if we kind of changed our approach a little bit and had less expectation of how many questions the children are completing, which actually would be in line with the other schools that we had seen, then that would free us up that space and that time in the lesson to really go and work with individual children and unpick their misconceptions.
And do you know what I loved about that at the time was that, like, your idea was about driving thinking rather than producing evidence in books, and that was so refreshing. I remember, like, when you actually stopped me on the stairs as we were passing each other one particular afternoon. You're like, "Oh, I've got this idea. This is what I want to do with maths, and this is why I need. I'm going to need some PD time, and this is how much I'm going to need, and this is what I want to do with it, and this is why." Because it's all about driving their thinking and making sure that they're actually thinking hard about some of these tougher concepts. And to me, that was the thing that really switched me onto it, because I thought, yeah, absolutely. Like, I think in education, we spend a lot of time thinking about or sort of designing lessons and designing activities to try and produce a written outcome or an evidenced outcome that we can put into a book and go, yeah, look, see, I did my job well. Whereas actually what we need to do is be much braver and go, we need to plan lessons and activities that really, really drive thinking. And hats off to you for doing it as well, because our school, you're right, it has like the data's really good. There was, like, the year before Danny made this change, the school had like 95% of kids getting the expected standard or above in maths at the end of Key Stage 2. So it would have been easy to go, oh, okay, well, let's not change anything in case it gets worse. I don't want to be the person to lead the change that drives data down. No one wants that. But you were really brave with that, and sort of thought, no, now's the time to change it when practice is already strong. Like, now's the time to kind of capitalize on that positivity that exists around the school in the context of maths and drive the next change and really push it forward. So yeah, I just thought it was a fantastic way that you went about it. Do you want to tell us then what was the sort of aim that you were going for? You've talked a little bit there about unpicking misconceptions and driving thinking, but tell us in a bit more detail what it is that you wanted to achieve with this change.
Yeah, so when I spoke to you on the stairs, I remember that conversation. We ended up on the stairs for quite a while. I was actually like thinking we should have sat down and had that conversation.
It was a good staircase conversation.
It was a very good stair chat. But yeah, I think for me, I was kind of directed by you to do some reading and research around it. And after reading around the idea, it was kind of matching it up with what actually is this that we need to work on as a school. And it wasn't necessarily looking at unpicking misconceptions, because our staff are good at that and they can do that well, and we've seen that in lessons. It's actually more of, is it a responsive teaching scenario where actually we need to train our staff to be, like you say, brave enough to step back and ask the questions and adapt their teaching in the moment to fit whatever it is that is needed in that lesson to move learning forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really clear. And the idea of being responsive has at its heart a word that that I'm absolutely obsessed with at the moment, and it's agency. It's something I really, really, really believe deeply in, that we've got to give teachers the agency to be the decision makers in their classrooms. And all too often, you've kind of got quite prescriptive lesson structures that people are kind of going through and working through in a tick box format. And like, in all honesty, like when I first came to our school, that was exactly what we put in place. Because, you know, we were right in that dreaded Ofsted window, and we were aware that we had quite an inconsistent outcomes, but also inconsistent teaching across the school in terms of approaches to teaching. And so the quickest way that we could kind of establish some kind of observable consistency was to kind of prescribe lesson structures. But we always kind of knew that actually in the long run, that's not sustainable. All that does is just exhaust people in the end, because you just feel like you're on that constant hamster wheel of trying to fulfill somebody else's expectations. If you want teaching and learning to be sustainably enjoyable, and it needs to be, to keep people in the profession, I think you need to make sure that you're giving them the agency to be the decision makers in the classrooms, because classrooms are such interactive places and they're such contextually changeable places. Things are shifting all the time, that if you allow someone to be responsive in that moment, you're far more likely to get them to kind of take some satisfaction out of that, and to feel that they can actually enact and respond to what's going on, and actually enact the change that needs to be made. So yeah, I loved the idea of it being rooted in responsive teaching, and that's a big focus for us over the course of the next year, as you know. But anything with agency at its heart, and trying to give teachers back some of that agency, it definitely got my vote as a result of that. What's your experience been on that, in terms of in your career of agency? Like, to what extent have you kind of felt that you've had agency in your teaching career? Is it something that some leaders have given and other leaders have taken away? Like, what's your experience been?
Yeah, exactly that. Some leaders have given it and some have taken it away. When I first started working there, it was very much, you were, as long as the children were learning and making progress and you were following the national curriculum, the way that you taught lessons was up to you. And I loved that. That suited me really well, because I have a very interactive style in my classroom. It's very back and forth all the time, quite creative, quite interesting, exciting, that kind of thing. And it just suited me really well. Data was always quite strong, so the children were learning, and we were just kind of left to our own devices. And then other leaders came in, very similar to what you've just said about the Ofsted window. We were in our Ofsted window. They did what all leaders do and just put in a prescriptive, everyone needs to be doing this so it's consistent. So we kind of lost a bit of agency there. And then once Ofsted had been and gone, that was freed up a little bit more, and we were kind of given a structure. But then once the staff had been trained and were knowledgeable, then they could change it. And that worked really well. And I know that is where the vision is for our school currently. The only downside to that, and it's not a negative because it can be, you know, preempted and things can be put in place, but I trained up quite a few members of staff in Mastery Maths, and they became Mastery experts. And we had triads running where our experts would go and support other teachers. So it wasn't just me as a maths leader. So we could really spread that knowledge and that support widely in the school. And then what happened is members of staff who were experts left. So you've got that knowledge of, so you've taken out the prescriptive scheme now, and you're expecting teachers to be developing it and adapting it in their own way. But when you get new members of staff join who haven't had that background and haven't had that training and gone through that process of the prescriptive bit first, that's where you get different interpretations of things, and that's where you start to lose the consistency, in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because basically what you've described there, I think, if you kind of imagine like an egg timer, so it starts off like really, or an egg timer shape anyway, it starts off like really broad and really open. usually just after a school's been through an Ofsted where everybody's on a bit of a high, and it's like, yeah, guys, do what you want. This is, I'm exaggerating to make the point, I suppose, but it's really free, and everyone can, of course we trust you. We're all in this together, and we're all great, and of course, agency trust, and then as you get closer and closer to that window, everything starts to narrow a little bit, and it starts to become a little bit more like, oh, okay, we trust you, but can you do it a bit more like this? And then as you get really close to the Ofsted window, often it's like, right, okay, everyone do it like this, and let's just keep going until we get through Ofsted. And so I think there's two bits to it, really. It's firstly, how do you make sure that as you move along that journey, you stay committed to providing that agency to teachers, but also satisfy your own sort of need as a leader, I suppose, to be able to say hand on heart, yes, we do have consistency in how something is taught in our school. And I think that really what leaders should be doing is trying to come up with a consistent way of thinking about teaching. And if everybody thinks and understands teaching and the teaching process and the learning process in the same way, not necessarily to say that everybody thinks identical things about it, but if everybody can at least believe in, or if you can't get to belief, then buy into, but ideally believe in, the shared, like one shared understanding of how the teaching and process works and how the learning process works. If everybody's got that and everybody's making decisions in their classrooms based on that agreed understanding, that is your consistency. It's not going to be like as visually obvious as what, everybody doing an arithmetic starter at the start of a lesson for the first 5 minutes would be, but it's nonetheless, it is consistency. The challenge there, therefore, is to be brave enough as a leader to go, yeah, we can support that and justify that when those inspectors come in. And that, I think, is the biggest shame of our system at the moment, is that when inspections take place, they don't, the way that they're set up, I don't think they facilitate inspectors, visitors, whoever it might be, really understanding and getting to the crux of what this school believes about teaching and learning. It's very much, as we all know, it's kind of surface level because of the nature of inspection and the size of schools and that kind of thing. If we could have a system that could get to the bottom of what does this school actually believe in and really valued that, then I think leaders would be brave enough to go, we have consistency in belief and thinking about teaching and learning, but what that consistency looks like from one room to another is we're going to have a lot more variance in it, in that respect. That was a bit of a sermon there. What do you think about
that? Yeah, that was a typical Adam talk.
Are you inspired?
Yeah.
Or bored?
I feel like I should have been on the stairs for that one.
We just had a comment from Chris in the chat. He said he loves the idea about moving away from pretty books. They could and should be used as an extension of their working memory, and and so they should. Absolutely agree with that one, Chris. Okay, so let's move on then to talking about the design of your PD. So how you actually went about designing it. So for anybody that's not familiar with Sam Sims' paper, so first of all, him and the team identified 4 categories or 4 purposes of PD, which then became categories later on. So the 4 purposes were to build knowledge, to motivate teachers, to develop teaching techniques, and to embed practice. And then within those, there's 14 mechanisms that actually bring those things to life, those purposes to life. So you've got within building knowledge, you've got managing cognitive load and revisiting prior learning. Within motivating teachers, you've got setting goals, a credible source, making sure there's a credible source for the information that you're imparting, affirming and reinforcing, and then underneath developing teaching techniques, we've got instruction, social support, modelling, rehearsal, monitoring and feedback. And then around embedding practice, prompts and cues, action planning, self-monitoring and context-specific repetition. And interestingly, in the paper, what they found was that professional development programs that pulled on multiple mechanisms at once in one go, they were the ones that had the biggest impact. So, for example, if you can imagine, I was trying to think of an example off the top of my head now, but if you can imagine when you delivering a PD session, and you've broken it up into really small parts. So you're making sure that everyone's understanding of one part is really secure before you move on to the next part. And you're relating each part to something that everybody already knows. So perhaps to an existing school policy or to an existing practice that everybody shares. And within each chunk, let's imagine that you also do some practice of actually putting whatever it is that you're teaching people to do into practice. And let's say that as part of that chunk, you also model it at the start. With all of that, you've got managing cognitive load, revisiting prior learning, modeling, and rehearsal. So 4 of those mechanisms all at play at the same time. So you kind of built that little learning episode for your staff around those 4 mechanisms. And because they're all at play at the same time, what the research suggests is that particular episode is going to be really, really powerful in terms of changing practice and having an impact. So those are the mechanisms, and that was basically what you decided to build this sequence of PD round, didn't you? And just I guess just to point out as well that before we go into this next bit is that sequences are really important. I know we touched on that earlier, but Danny was given a series of 4 sessions to kind of get this change across and begin to embed it and get people to believe and see where she was going with this. And she was tasked with sort of weaving in the mechanisms into how she delivered each form of PD. So Danny, do you want to start off then by telling us a little bit about how you did that?
Yeah, so prior to the staff meetings, we had run a pilot of how we wanted the new math structure and the lessons to look like. And I'd done that with 2 teachers from the staff team, one in my current year group in year 4 and one in year 2. And that actually came about just through staff room chat. They both had expressed an interest in it and we were talking about changing it. And that's when I spoke to you on the stairs and got the go ahead to go ahead with it. And then using the pilot, I then looked at those mechanisms and matching it up and working out what was the best CPD to deliver to enable this. And this is where the responsive teaching came in, because that was the part that we felt our staff team would benefit of this with the support from. And then we kind of used the pilot alongside the staff training that I delivered to give it context.
Yeah,
so the
brilliant.
first thing that we did was talk about research. So it was talking about, because I had a couple of meetings with yourself and we talked about how we were going to structure it. So we said the first one should be looking at the rationale of it all and researching what responsive teaching is. So we read a chapter and we just discussed it, and that was our staff meeting.
Yeah, love it, and that's so powerful as well, just to be able to really go slow. And if you take that simple example of just, you know, I put a chapter in front of people, we read it, we responded to it. If you go back to the to the mechanisms, it's really easy there to see which ones you're pulling on. So you've got the fact that you're pulling on a credible source. So it was a chapter from a book by Harry Fletcher Wood. So you've got a little bit of that. You've got some social support as well, given the fact that you were therefore you were discussing everything together and making sure that everybody got a say and everyone was kind of building on each other's ideas. There would have also been an element of affirming and reinforcing there as well when you come up with an idea and or interpretation, and then colleagues kind of agree with that and or build on it, and just to give you that kind of affirmation of your interpretation of it. But also that the big one really is, it is all about, with that particular session, it's all about setting your change in the context of a really, really credible source. That's sort of the beginnings of getting people to believe in this change, and in the worthwhile nature of the change, because the source that kind of sparks it is a really credible one. So yeah, that was that. I thought that the way you started with that first session where you had that running was really intelligently done. But I was really interested to the fact that you ran this pilot beforehand with just 2 or 3 teachers. what was the thinking what was the thinking behind that? Why did you think actually the way to start this is by starting small and actually having this pilot running?
I think obviously if you're going to run something out whole school, you want to know that it's going to be beneficial first. So that was obviously an idea behind it. The other reason was because it was my year group, so I could control it and work out exactly how I wanted it delivered.
Dictator Sands over here.
Yeah, to see how it would work. And for myself, I felt if I'm going to ask staff to believe and buy into it, then I need to first of all prove that I've done it. So, and also I need to make changes as I go. I know it's not going to be perfect first time, and it's probably not perfect now, but there's always ways that you can adapt and improve anything in teaching and education, as we know. So I think it was more just I wanted to experience it myself, put myself in the staff's position, how manageable it is in the classroom, how manageable it is in terms of workload in the planning, and what the benefits are in the children as well. Because when you're in the classroom and you can physically see children lighting up because they're more confident in something, or they've had so much more time to go through something and they're not showing those frustrations that they would normally show in a lesson. It's just seeing those real benefits in front of you to say, actually, do you know what, this does work. There is something good behind this, and it would benefit a lot more children if we rolled it out on a wider scale.
Do you know, there's two things there that I really love. The first one I'll tell you is that word power. So if I forget later on, just tell me, just remind me the word power, and I'll remember. But the other one is this idea that you just touched on at the end there, where now that idea's gone. Unbelievable how that happens. Do you ever get that? Your mind just goes blank. You think, all right, I've got these two ideas. I'm going to hold these, and then it just goes. Let me start with the power one, because I just thought that was really interesting. I think we've talked a lot about agency and the importance of agency, and I think the idea of kind of power and control often sits in this kind of quite paradoxical space, separate from agency, or that's sort of how it's seen. But I actually think that fidelity to one particular way of doing things is a necessary step in eventually achieving full-blown agency. And the reason I think that is because it's a little bit like when you explain a concept to a class of children. There'll be lots of, and I've seen you do this within the maths pilot as well. Actually, you teach the concept and you create a generalization together, and then you go out and you experiment with how that generalization applies, and to what extent that generalization applies, and how consistently it applies, and whether it needs to be adapted and changed. But you can't do any of that work, any of that more kind of agency-based work, I suppose. You can't do any of that unless you've got a really solid grasp of that generalization, unless you're showing fidelity to that generalization. So I think that having it, as you say, set in that way, it's just come back to me. Just remind me in a second. I want to talk about being experience led but research informed. So let me come back to that one. So yeah, but the idea of actually making sure that, okay, we're all going to show fidelity to this thing first, and then we're going to look at how we can adapt it and change it and roll it out in different ways. I think it's a necessary step along the journey to providing agency, rather than a paradox. Go on, remind me, what was the second point?
It was experience-led and research-informed.
There you go. Yeah, and so valuable that you were part of the pilot as well, and because you were then able, firstly, to bring your experiences of putting it into practice. So the theory is absolutely vital, and everything we do in school, I think we have to have a rationale behind it. And there's such a wealth of research and information out there now that's so accessible to us that we'd be silly not to use it. But ultimately, that's only the start. So being research informed is really important, as to kind of spark the interest and to spark the initial idea. But then we've got to be experience and context driven. And that, I think, is about making sure that we apply the research and then apply the theory in the way that best suits the context. And the way that we do that, and the way we learn how best to do that is I think through direct experience. So you just talked there about seeing the children's faces light up and seeing the confidence improve in them. that is so powerful for teachers to see that in real life happening in classrooms, because that again is where I think, you know, you can buy into to research. I think you only start to believe when you really see it in practice in a classroom in your context.
Yeah,
What do
I
you?
think I agree. I think I agree with what you were saying about the whole power thing, being that it is really powerful when you can physically see children making progress and building confidence, because the progress, I think, is probably easier than building confidence in children, because so much of their lack of confidence has come through prior experiences, and it's about unpicking that and really trying to get them to believe in themselves and see that they can actually do something. And the only way they're going to get that is by experiencing that success first. And that's hard to get to when you've got a child who's reluctant, doesn't think they're very good at maths, thinks that everything in maths is hard because in previous experiences they've always found everything is hard in maths. So definitely that element of seeing children's confidence grow is really powerful as a class teacher, I think.
Joe, the thing that I loved most about what you just said there, because I think it hopefully speaks to the wider culture that we've kind of got in our schools. You started off that by saying, "I think I agree," and it's so nice because it's like, I don't want to commit too early. Like, what you're saying sort of sounds like it makes sense, but I've got to think about this a little bit more before I decide. So yeah, I love that. Okay, right. So next up, we're going to get into what Danny did in. Well, it sounds like a film, actually, isn't it? What Danny did. That'd be a good one. We're going to get into what Danny did in sessions 2, 3, and 4 after she kind of set the scene with that initial piece of research and reading that everybody did together. But before we get into that, we're going to go to an ad break and also hear the news.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading. Introducing My New Term, the revolutionary technology application connecting schools and candidates directly. Whether you're a school seeking to streamline your recruitment process or a candidate searching for your next role in education, My New Term has the solution. Developed by a former teacher, the technology at My New Term now connects tens of thousands of candidates with schools every month by digitizing the recruitment process. As a candidate, you can search for jobs, set up recommended jobs, and save time by applying directly to schools via a standardized online process. No more completing manual and repetitive application forms. Employers can streamline processes and save time utilizing the leading applicant tracking system for schools and multi-academy trusts. Recruitment in education has been broken for too long. My New Term is on a mission to change just that. Visit mynewterm.com to learn more, search all the latest opportunities, or schedule a demo. My New Term, shaping the future of education recruitment.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This week on Teachers Talk Radio News, the King's speech at the state opening of Parliament outlined Labour's legislative programme for the year ahead, with 32 bills, including an ambitious education bill, the provisions of which will come into effect in late 2025. These include extending the national curriculum to all schools, including free schools and trusts, a statutory requirement for a curriculum review, qualified teacher status for all teachers. Currently there are 17,000 teachers who are unqualified and working in schools. Multi-academy trusts to be inspected by Ofsted, a register of all children not in school, breakfast clubs will become a legal requirement, and the cost of branded uniforms to be capped. Also this week in the news, many students, parents and teachers will be delighted to hear the news that the UCAS personal statement is to be abolished. Joe Saxon, Chief Executive of UCAS, announced that the end of the personal statement was to open doors of opportunity and encourage applicants from disadvantaged backgrounds. Professor Lee Elliott Major, the Professor of Social Mobility, described this as a significant step to make admissions a little bit fairer. However, a number of critics pointed out that the UCAS personal statement is to be replaced by 3 questions, which almost exactly replicate the structure and content of the current UCAS personal statement. This week, All Saints Academy in Dunstable had lost its appeal to the High Court in its judicial review of its Ofsted inspection. 2 inspections, relatively close together in time, came to very different conclusions about the school. This led to them questioning the methodology and appealing for the criteria to be revealed. Mr. Justice Kavanagh, in his judgment against the school, indicated that all such judgments must contain a degree of subjectivity, and that the High Court was not the proper place to settle matters of public policy. These should be left to politicians. Some legal analysts, while agreeing overall with the role of the courts, have pointed out that, of course, this judgment itself contains a high degree of subjectivity. Labour's new Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has announced that term-time holiday fines for absence from school are to continue. They are here to stay. She stated that parents should honour their responsibilities and recognise the importance of attendance in schools, and that it was necessary to have some deterrent and consequences. Parents groups have pointed out the cost savings of taking children on holiday in term time far outweigh the current fines, and that largely this remains a tax on poor families. In the school year 2022 to 23, permanent exclusions reached a record high, up 44% on the year before to 9,376. School suspensions were also up 36%. Beth Prescott, education lead at the Centre for Social Justice, said, "These are truly shocking figures, with both school exclusions and suspensions at new record highs, combined with a crisis in school absence with the so-called ghost children at near record levels. 1 in 5 kids persistently absent. There's a pressing and immediate emergency unfolding across our schools." This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs. Thank you for listening.
Okay, welcome back. Another interesting week in the world of educational news, and I guess just immediately after a general election, it's always going to be quite an interesting time to be in any sort of public service. But it always does seem that education is an area that everybody has a view on, I suppose, because everybody has an experience of as well. We've all been to schools, even if we don't work in them. So it's always going to be a point of interest. I would just urge one thing to the new government, if Bridget Phillipson is listening, maybe she is. It'd be great to know if she is, if she's got the podcast on automatic download or something like that. God, that'd be a dream, wouldn't it? But if she is listening, I think that just urging a little bit of nuance with this take on trying to make sure that everybody has QTS, even so unqualified teachers would have to go and get QTS from somewhere. Just please, let's do that in a way that doesn't completely alienate those people and drive them away out of the profession and into doing other things, because there are some fabulous unqualified teachers who are doing brilliant jobs in independent schools up and down the country, and it would be a crying shame to lose their expertise. Even if we are going to push through with all good intentions of making sure that everybody has QTS, let's not do it in such a way as to lose people that are already doing a great job in classrooms. Let's try and do it with them rather than to them, please. Okay, so back to our journey through this PD sequence. So we've talked a little bit already about session one that Danny ran, and it was all around doing some shared reading and research and giving people the opportunity to respond to that together collectively and get a shared understanding of exactly what it is that Danny wanted to tap into over the rest of her sessions. So then, Danny, what was session two? What did that look like?
Yeah, session two was looking at when we had session one, and through our discussion, we talked about things that were real positives through the chapter and things. So session two was looking at what do we do now in maths and what is it from what we found that were positives in the chapter that we don't do. So it was looking at what is it that we actually need to look at changing or adapting to make it better.
Yeah, brilliant. And that was sort of mainly delivered with you at the front of the room, talking to people about what it was that you wanted them to change and providing some concrete models and examples, right?
Yeah, I think that in that one as well, I showed them a video of a short snippet of myself delivering the lesson in that style with that structure, and we had a lot of response to the video in terms of questions and just talking about what the benefits were and what my process was as a teacher, looking at we call it the purposes, don't we? Deciding our purpose and choosing a strategy in that moment, and we use that really well, and that sparked a really good conversation from the staff team, which I think really helped the belief.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for people listening, so yeah, we have our sort of consistent way of thinking about teaching and learning. We talked before about consistency and different types of consistency, and we are less bothered, increasingly less bothered now about kind of visual consistency, but we do want a consistent way of thinking about the teaching process and the learning process. And so we've got 5 stages to that teaching process. And we frame that as 5 teaching purposes. So dependent on what your purpose is in any given point in the lesson, that would then inform your strategy options, and then you'd make your strategy choice based on the context of that very moment. So your purpose might be to drive thought. Therefore, you might have 4 or 5 different strategy options that you think all of those could actually be effective at driving thought, and then you'd make a strategy choice. Maybe you're going to use some pair share time and with like a scaffold sentence starter. Perhaps that's the strategy that you choose, and that choice would be entirely dependent on the context of the children in front of you, the moment, sometimes even like the time of day where you are in that teaching sequence. So yeah, it's all about being clear on your purpose, then using that to identify what your choices are, and then applying your context to actually making your choice. So yeah, I thought actually that watching you actually deliver the video, it kind of had 2 purposes. So it made it all seem very achievable because you were right there in front of us doing it, but also it enabled you to have a concrete model of exactly what it was that you were talking about. So I felt like that was really effective at kind of bridging that gap between the theory and the practice. From a deliberate standpoint, what were the mechanisms that you were pulling on in that session?
Yeah, I think definitely a bit of instruction, because obviously you're showing a video, so that is one way of doing it, and I made that really clear the whole way through. We are looking at responsive teaching. This is one way of doing it. This isn't the way. So it was more about that teacher autonomy all the way through, rather than usually you would deliver something and then kind of backwards fade it to give a teacher autonomy after. Like teacher agency. So this was kind of, we have teacher agency all the way through. We're going to talk you through the purposes and give you a kind of a toolkit that you can pull on and use as of when you need it. So definitely instruction, but also we really looked at in that session setting a goal. So what was our goal? So we were looking at, if this is what maths looks like here now, and this is what we found was really positive from the reading and the research, what would be our collective goal to get towards that point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really, really well set as well. I think that it was very clear that the aim of that session was to kind of help everybody come up with a collective goal. And as we kind of evolve this as well, what we would kind of seek to do is go, okay, so if this is our collective goal, what does your individual goal look like as a class teacher? And then once you've set your individual goal, because this transition that we're trying to make in how we teach maths in the school, because that's our whole school focus, let's work out what your individual goal is within that. And then that becomes the goal that you have with your coach as part of our instructional coaching program. So everybody has instructional coaching on a weekly basis. And so, we would have that goal as the thing that they're aiming for, and use instructional coaching as the implementation method for that as well, which we're kind of really looking forward to putting into practice. I would also say that you had a really strong example of modeling there as well. And if you remember what you also had while they were watching that video, they were able to kind of take notes on that as well. Which was a really nice example of self-monitoring. And then at the end of it, as part of that goal setting, you got everybody to talk about exactly what they would need to do to enact that goal, which was kind of pulling on action planning as well. So it was really, really strong, that session, in terms of the number of mechanisms that you pulled on. And I want to be clear about that as well, is like what Danny delivered was closer to a sort of traditional CPD session that we've all probably had, which was like one person standing at the front delivering. We're not saying that is bad at all. And if that's what PD currently looks like in your school, that could well work. But what I would urge you to do is to look at the effectiveness of that, and to look at the design of those sessions and think, right, is there anything within those sessions that we can tweak? And if we're going to tweak it, let's tweak it so that we pull on more of these mechanisms throughout that session, and more of these mechanisms at the same time. And what you just end up doing is just tightening the effectiveness of that session. So it's not about throwing something out and starting again. It's about using these mechanisms as almost as like a review tool of what you're currently doing, and then adapting and amending accordingly. Okay, so then on to session 3. What did session 3 look like?
Session 3 was a lesson study. So we talked at the end of session 2, we kind of left it on what we felt the children were in the video in terms of their understanding. So it was a new concept was delivered, and then we talked about their showing understanding, and then they were getting connected understandings. They were demonstrating that they had connected their understanding up with different areas, and they could understand how to apply the pictorial representation to complete an abstract calculation. But then it was that varied connections that they weren't quite getting. They weren't able to then translate that to solve a problem using that skill. So we talked in lesson 3, we had a really good conversation amongst the staff team about how we can bridge that gap. So our lesson study was on bridging the gap, but it was more around looking at the actual structure of that maths session. So we had talked a lot about the reasoning behind it and how we wanted to change it and what our goal was. So then session 3 was more about instruction and what that could look like. So I provided them with kind of a step-by-step guide of how a class teacher could go about planning that session through using White Rose Maths as a support, but not as a lesson scheme of work.
Yeah, and there are lots of other schemes are available as well. Important to say that out there, but it's I think what was really great about that session was that you were really pulling on this idea of monitoring and feedback, but it was like monitoring and feedback of you. So kind of everybody did that because it was a lesson study of your lesson. Everybody had the opportunity to feed back on what you were doing. And there's a really, really strong aspect of social support in that. because you're taking on that role of that very vulnerable position of putting yourself on camera there in front of everybody else to kind of be critiqued, if you like. And I think that the psychological safety that offers to other people, having seen you do it and having seen you kind of model this idea of, okay, look, I did this thing on the video, but look, this is the bit that didn't quite land as I wanted it to, and this is the bit that I'm going to go about trying to improve going forward. The psychological safety that offers people is really, really powerful, and I think it lends itself to teeing up some really good self-monitoring, because if people see you enacting that self-monitoring yourself and going about that, then they're going to be far more willing to do it themselves. Okay, so then on to session 4. What did session 4 look like?
Yeah, so just on the point of social support, what was actually really strong in session 3 was the other people who were doing the pilot had kind of joined in at that point, and particularly the member of staff who's in Key Stage 1, because I had shown a video clip from Key Stage 2, and there were a few questions that had come up from staff team about how that would look in Key Stage 1 and how it would work differently. And actually that's when the other team member who had been doing the pilot in Key Stage 1 was really supportive and managed to talk to the staff about how they had adapted it to suit the age of children.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was really powerful for people to see and hear as well. And how often is it that, you know, particularly early years staff who will kind of be made to sit through PD that actually is really, really difficult for them to apply, or if they can apply it, it's them that's got to do the thinking and the working out of what that might mean for early years. But the fact that you did that very deliberate bit where you'd modelled something in Key Stage 2, but then you also had an example of a teacher doing that in Key Stage 1 was I thought that was really, really fantastic. Okay, so then into session 4 then, what did that look like?
Yeah, so session 4. So at the end of session 3, I had planned for staff to have a go, because I'd given them that step-by-step walkthrough. It was the idea that they would then go and plan their first lesson coming back from September. But unfortunately, the conversation was really strong, which isn't a bad thing, and we just ran away with time. So then session 4 was all about how we're going to put that into practice, how we're going to plan it. And we talked a lot about strategy choices. Because the conversation was so strong in the last meeting, we did the same again, where I showed them a clip this time from Key Stage 1, and then the teachers had to identify what the purpose was at the time, and then how they would choose a strategy to support that in the classroom. And that was really useful, because it's just, you could really see, I think, I don't know if you'd agree, Adam, but from the first and second sessions, there was definitely interest from the staff, but you could really see in session 4, their understanding was growing in terms of the purpose and the strategy model. And they were really able to identify a purpose quite quickly, and what strategy they would rely on for that. And I thought that really came through the sessions. But definitely it was about planning. So just giving the staff an opportunity to plan it themselves, see how it works, and actually have that kind of troubleshooting session where I'm available, they're planning. If something comes up and they're unsure, they can ask me there and then. Like, that was the time to ask questions. That was the time to come up with challenges and things. So at the end of that session, I gave 4 pieces of paper, where one was about what did the staff understand about the purpose going into strategy. So how much of the model had they grasped and understood, and how would they use it in their classroom practice going forward? And then another one was about the lesson structure. So how much of the lesson structure did they understand, and how much of the external schemes are they going to use, and what are they going to lean into? And then how, because a large part of this was responsive teaching, you're obviously being responsive in the moment, but something that came out through the chapter reading was actually, how do we check pupils' understanding in the room? So we have a lot of CPD as teachers about, how do we pick up on misconceptions? How do we approach that misconception? Do we do a mini plenary? Do we go and work with children individually? And actually, there was a lot of discussion amongst the staff in those sessions about really checking what the children understand. So instead of saying, do you understand? Simple yes or no, it's actually, tell me what you understand about it, and then really unpicking it. And that came through, there was a really good example in the chapter of framing your vocabulary to gain a wider insight of children's understanding. And it was really simple changes that actually had a really big impact. So that was on there as well. And then finally was, what did the staff want me to monitor? So not in a way of, what do you want me to look at when I walk in your room and look through your books? And, you know, choose something easy, like, is the date in there? So you can tick that box. But actually, what is it that you would benefit from individually? So what part of this do you think would be a challenge, or what part of this do you feel you have less experience with, or would like to focus on through your instructional coaching models and things like that? And actually, from seeing it and having the large pieces of paper and looking at them, it was really refreshing to see how honest the staff had been in sharing their knowledge and their understanding of it. And I think something that's a real credit to our staff team in our school is actually they will get on board with so much. They're so committed, and they benefit from being honest, because they can get the support and better their own understanding and their own teaching and learning in their classrooms. There's that real understanding that we're all there to help each other and better ourselves and our children. And I think that just comes through when you look at what the staff had written on these pieces of paper, really.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's also a credit to you in terms of this, like the psychological safety again that you created throughout that whole sequence. And I think it's something that's really key. Is like, if you're a leader of any kind, and you're going into watch someone's lesson, just really consider carefully what your purpose is, because if I would say that every time, more or less, I'm going into a classroom, I'm going in there to collect information that I can offer to that teacher to help them improve as a result of it. I'm not going in there to try and do some kind of evaluation or judgment on the quality of what's going on, because it's such a tiny little snapshot, and there's such a vast number of contextual factors that are going on in that room that I've got no understanding of as the visitor, that the only purposeful thing that I can do with my time in that room is to collect information that I can share with the teacher, and then we can use that together to try and work out what that information means, and then plot a way forward. So I think if you're going in with that purpose and that intention, then you're going to find yourself more often than not working in partnership with teachers. And if you can get that thing where you're working in partnership with people in any organization, that's where you get that people being prepared to take on that position of vulnerability and going, yeah, I don't get that bit, or I'm really struggling with this bit. And if you've got that, like, I think development and improvement happens so much more easily, and it just becomes something natural. So yeah, it's absolutely vitally important to get that right. And it's hard to do, but I think that if you can get it right, it's well worth it. Okay, so we're going to head to our final ad break and get a few more messages from our friends, and then when we get back, we're going to find out about what kind of challenges Danny experienced along the way of that journey that she's been on, how she overcame them, and what's coming next.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading. Introducing My New Term, the revolutionary technology application connecting schools and candidates directly. Whether you're a school seeking to streamline your recruitment process or a candidate searching for your next role in education, My New Term has the solution. Developed by a former teacher, the technology at My New Term now connects tens of thousands of candidates with schools every month by digitizing the recruitment process. As a candidate, you can search for jobs, set up recommended jobs, and save time by applying directly to schools via a standardized online process. No more completing manual and repetitive application forms. Employers can streamline processes and save time utilizing the leading applicant tracking system for schools and multi-academy trusts. Recruitment in education has been broken for too long. My New Term is on a mission to change just that. Visit mynewterm.com to learn more, search all the latest opportunities, or schedule a demo. My New Term, shaping the future of education recruitment.
Okay, welcome back. So, Danny, the biggest challenges that you faced then in terms of enacting that fantastic plan that you had along the way, and like I say, from my point of view, it had tons of impact. I think at one stage during the sequence that I'd have paid for that PD personally, because I think it was that good. I think just one other point to make actually before I ask you that question is that we've talked about session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4. There's no requirement, I don't think, for those sessions to follow week on week. So I think in terms of like the spacing between them, you've got to really think carefully about what you want people to go away and do with the thinking that they did in that session. So for example, between session 3 and session 4, if you do get to do some action planning in session 3, you maybe want to leave it 2 or 3 weeks before you come to session 4, so that people have had some time to really internalize and try things out, and so that they've got more to bring to session 4. Obviously, sometimes there are time constraints, like, being dangerously close to the end of the school year, for example, and you're having to squeeze it all in. But as much as you possibly can do, in the same way that you think strategically about the content of each session, think strategically about the spacing between the sessions as well. So yeah, Danny, the biggest challenge that you faced, and how did you overcome it?
I think when we were doing the actual pilot, we came across a few challenges and we had adapted. We met quite a lot as a group to talk about how it was going and what changes we'd made in our classroom, and if we could come up with a certain solution for a certain area. So we actually found that there were, where part of the pilot, part of the structure is having a bit more guided practice time to give the teachers that space and time to go around and check children's understanding. Mm-hmm. And it was during that time that our more able children would do it quite quickly and then want the next thing, because that's what our children are like. They always want the next challenge. So we developed kind of a thinking strip. So we thought, rather than doing an additional challenge, we would provide the children with some sentence starters to get the children to really explain their understanding of the maths. So it was things like, I know that my first step was, I could check this with. So it was unpicking it that way. And I knew that the one thing that would come up as a query for developing this in our school would be, well, what about our higher achieving children? And actually that did come up as a question, and it's something that we had explored through the pilot. And we actually found that the thinking strip with the sentence questions, sentence stems, was really useful in keeping those children who are more able in maths and more confident in maths, to keep them engaged in the learning, but also to really give them the skills to unpick their understanding and reason. So that was something that came up and something that we had tried out in the pilot and foreseen and were able to give a solution for. The other thing that I thought would be a challenge would be actually motivation for staff, because like you say, it was right at the end of the year. Everyone's tired at this point. And I did say to the staff at the end of the last meeting that I was really appreciative of their commitment and their, the way that they had approached it was really good. And I always provided them with snacks, so I think that kind of
Did
helped me
you
along the
did?
way. But yeah, in terms of actual challenges in the CPD cycle, probably would be having persuading the staff members to want to be recorded. I I have done a lot of lesson recording throughout my career because it came in through one of our leaders. They really enjoyed it. They actually bought Lesson Recorder, which is a program where you get proper cameras that you can set up, microphones, tripods, the whole shebang. So I was part of that process. So lesson recording, I've gotten over it. It's fine. People can watch me, come in my room as much as they want. It's fine. But other members of staff are maybe not as comfortable with it. So definitely convincing members of staff to want to be filmed, especially at this point in the year where it's quite difficult, as all teachers know, to keep their children ticking over and getting the high models that you want to show a staff team in a staff meeting. But yeah, we got there in the end. I managed to persuade a few people to, and the way I did that was kind of by saying, we're all in this together. I'm not saying I want a perfect model. I'm saying that it would be really nice to show the staff team another person teaching rather than just me. And also to show how you do it differently down in a younger year group, and just show what your thinking is as a teacher in comparison to mine, and the differences, and more people in that room might relate to how you teach compared to how I teach, because I had quite a wide knowledge of maths behind me, whereas you've come from it from a much different perspective. So you're probably more relatable to watch deliver it than I am. So it was kind of that convincing approach that was probably quite a challenge, I would say.
I think that there's a couple of interesting bits there. Like you talked to begin with about like the fact that it's at the end of the year, and how do you motivate everyone? And the key, I think, to that is the fact that success comes first, and then motivation comes from the success. And too often we kind of can get those two around the wrong way, and we try and motivate people and kids actually in lessons often. Like we try and sort of start with motivation and think, oh well, we'll get them, if we can get them hooked in, then we can get them learning after that. Let's get motivation first. Whereas actually, if we get the success first, then the motivation naturally follows. And I think that's what you achieved with the pilot. That you had them experiencing success, the people that were part of the pilot anyway, to start with, and so they were already motivated, and then immediately you've got 3 or 4 other people in the room that are motivated on day one. And then this idea about how do you get people to be okay with being videoed? I think there's probably 2 bits there. The first thing is that you've got to be in an environment that doesn't judge. Because, again, it comes back to that purpose of, okay, why are you observing either video or live? You're observing to gather information so that you can use that information with the teacher to try and drive improvement together. So it's that partnership principle coming back again. But then there's another thing as well, I suppose, where some people just do not like being video. They don't like to see themselves on camera. It's a bit like that the first time you hear yourself on video as well. The first time you hear yourself talking. You kind of, there's no way I actually sound like that, and of course you do. So there's that bit which is an insecurity for some people as well, and I think there's got to be space to kind of allow for that. But there are variations that you can do instead of like filming an entire lesson and watching it as a whole staff. You can encourage someone to video a lesson, watch it themselves, and then come to a coaching session, not with the video, but just with the information that they've gathered for themselves from the video. Or you can, just watch it one-on-one together, or not at all. Like there's lots of effective approaches to PD that don't involve video as well. But I do think that if you can get people to use video, then you will end up supercharging the process. So yeah, that's my little bit on that anyway. Danny, that's been brilliant. Just taking us through that, that step by step of how you put that PD sequence together, how you delivered it, and how you made sure that you were constantly pulling on all of those mechanisms. And I can absolutely vouch for the fact that it's definitely had impact in terms of changing teachers' motivations, changing teachers' beliefs, and beginning to move into changing teachers' practice. It's definitely had an impact. And I know that when we sat down and looked at the outcomes for children from the beginning of the pilot to the end of the pilot, there was pretty strong anecdotal evidence there of impact on the children. And I know you were really modest about that and also realistic, and said that we can't put all of that down to the pilot, because there's lots of other factors as well, and it's not possible to kind of separate out exactly what that active ingredient was. But nonetheless, it definitely hasn't done any damage. And that's half the battle, I think, with some of this stuff. Danny, what's next for you then in terms of your in terms of either the leadership of maths, but also for you in your career? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go next? This is a bit like an appraisal meeting now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we had this meeting the other day.
Yeah, we did actually.
Yeah, no, I think for me, it's looking at, I really enjoy the professional development side, and I really enjoy mentoring. I recently mentored a student teacher who has got a job in our school now.
He has.
So, yeah, I really enjoy that part of it, and helping others see their potential, but also for me personally, doing the structure this way and looking at the mechanisms and having the models alongside it really helps me to understand the process of it. And going forward, when I'm delivering CPD, I would definitely use the models again. I know, like, when we've had conversations about me planning each meeting, I know that I've got more confident with the mechanisms. So yeah, that's been really useful. But definitely I'd like to do something further in professional development, because I have learned from yourself that I deliver CPD that's worth paying for.
That's it. That's absolutely it. And I think it's important as well. And I know we've been talking about PD this evening as well, but just on the subject of leadership as well, as if it needed to be stated any more obviously. But Danny is a part-time working mum who has had huge impact in her leadership. So she is walking evidence that it absolutely can be done. So if you are a leader out there that's kind of thinking, that still has their sort of lingering doubts about the ability of part-time staff to deliver impact in leadership roles, like, stop right there, because we've got a walking, talking example of that in Danny. She does an absolutely wonderful job, and will be an asset to any organisation that she goes on to lead in. Hopefully ours for many years to come. Danny, thanks so much for that this evening. It's been super insightful and really enjoyable as well, and actually really, really interesting for me to be able to kind of unpack that whole process with you, having sort of seen you go through it as well. So yeah, thank you so much for that this evening.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. We'll have to get you back on at another time, perhaps to talk about leadership journeys and things like that, perhaps.
Yeah, sounds good.
Good stuff. Right. In that case, then, all that remains for me to say is to everybody listening to enjoy your summer break. We are very, very nearly there, if you're not already there, in fact, in some schools, although some schools will be going on right the way through to the end of July. So when we get there, whenever you get there, have a really restful summer break, and I look forward to hearing more from everybody in September. If you are around this evening, and you want to stay on and listen to more Teachers Talk Radio content, I would highly recommend you do that. Tom Rogers is next up with the Late Show, 7:30 till 9. So do stick around and listen to Tom if you can. It will be well worth catching what he has to say as ever. But until next time, thank you very much for listening. Enjoy your evening, and I will see you again on Teachers Talk Radio with a new guest and a new topic.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.